Hey, so here's a question. Has Monster Hunter lost its edge? Has it lost its darker tone? Did it even have a dark tone to begin with? The answer is simple. Yes, Monster Hunter had a grittier tone in first generation. It sort of waved on and off in the mainline games. However, in the portable games, it is practically gone now. I'm sure many will agree with my answer. I hope. The rest of the video will elaborate on my evidence towards my answer. This video is simply a discussion piece. There's not a lot of objective points I'm making, it's a lot of interpretive analysis. It's not in any way a viable criticism against Rise or any of the other Monster Hunter games. This is merely an exploration of aesthetic. This is a difficult conversation because aesthetics are difficult to quantify. There will be players who are playing Rise for the first time, and they'll probably find the ghost story aesthetic of the monster introductions to be spooky, and there's a high chance that they could actually find the monsters' environments to be gritty and dark. Meanwhile, to a returning fan, these cutscenes may seem quite trivial, and the game may seem flashy and silly. It's important to acknowledge that everyone has a different interpretation of Monster Hunter's various aesthetics. It seems kind of absurd that I'm doing this, but my goal is to try and define and then showcase Monster Hunter 1's aesthetic to the best of my ability, which I don't think is possible, but I'll try. Then I'm going to compare this aesthetic briefly to other Monster Hunter titles with the main objective to compare this aesthetic specifically to Monster Hunter World and Monster Hunter Rise, as they're the newest titles and they have the most current attention. So what is Monster Hunter 1's aesthetic? For years, I've been plagued with the aesthetics of Monster Hunter 1. Like, it exists in my mind, it's like formless, it's just in images and sounds, but I can't describe it in words. The ecology videos for Monster Hunter 1 are a good starting point, so let's start there. The environments are familiar, they aren't fantastical from first glance. This is what makes the monsters stand out, because they are the fantasy. When they viciously attack one another, it's terrifying. It's funny, it's even shot like a nature documentary if you look. It's the fantastical, but it's juxtaposed in the mundane. Take a look at these. These artworks were created during the portable 2nd G and Monster Hunter Tri days. They were for a trading card game. There's different art styles on display here, but they all have a very distinct, almost manga-like inspiration. I'm sure the artists are probably manga artists. The monsters are fantastical and they're striking, but the backgrounds are very mundane and simple, and that's to be expected. The monsters are the focus of the artwork. They should stand out. The sky is usually overcast or it's cloudy. Rarely is it completely clear. All of these images also seem to have a certain haze or fog to them. It reminds me of the fog prevalent in the old jungle and the old swamp. The old maps from Monster Hunter 1 are quiet and serene, but there's also an edge to them. There's a mystery beyond the fog, and who knows what's past those trees. The idea was to make the player afraid. The monsters were far more deadly and unforgiving. Go slow, take your time, be careful. I'm particularly fond of the old swamp. It rains a lot where I live. I'm in a temperate rainforest. I have overcast nearly every day of the week, so I related to this map quite a lot. It reminded me of when I used to take long walks to my school. I wanted to see if I could capture the look of the old swamp on video, just walking around my town, but I don't think I can. I think it's probably because I'm missing the fog. So a co-worker of mine, who's a talented cinematographer, he captured footage of a coastal migratory birds on a foggy spring morning, and this is close. What this image reminds me of is actually a meme image. This one. Yeah, this one. And you know what makes this a striking image? It's the mundane and gray background with the fantastical monster, and then it's like the cute little hunter that's battling the monster. Actually, you can see a lot of similar situations in the trading card art. I learned from studying this image that in order to create and to capture the look of the old swamp, you need to include this. See the flora reflected in the puddles? That's the old swamp, and that's difficult to get in real life. A huge part of the game's look came from the technical limitations. The skyboxes used in these maps were very archaic. The classic look creates a feeling of claustrophobia. It also creates a dreary, almost manga-like look. as if the backgrounds could be white space. I think the intention for the maps was to act actually as negative space, so that the combat and the monsters stand out. However, the maps in first gen also have a lot of visible debris like the trees and stuff and the fog, and that technically conceals the monsters, so, you know, I'm sure that was equally intended, so it's like, it's a bit of a contradiction. When the player is hunting in one of these maps, they're separated from humanity and they're placed in the hostile world of monsters. If the player is playing alone, it's extra haunting and lonely. I believe Capcom's intention was to create a terrifying and dangerous hunt. When you're spotted by the monster, it's like the Jaws soundtrack, and then if you engage in combat, the music is quite intimidating and it's also ancient. The vibe of the music is in favor of the monster. It's cheering on the monster and it's exaggerating the terror that the monster brings. What's interesting is when the player is returned to the village or town, the tone of the game flips upside down. Now the music is calm and people are chill. There's zero pressure or anxiety to be gained in the village. It's only peace and support. This is present in many video games. This is certainly not a new concept that Monster Hunter invented. However, it's a trope that is highly effective. There is an inconsistent tone between the quest, which is stressful, and the village, which is friendly. And this is good. We all seem to agree that we like this. I believe Monster Hunter thrives in the juxtaposition of fantasy and reality. A relatively normal human village, but it has the fantastical hunters dressed in the skin of dragons. And then you have some relatively normal environments, but it has these terrifying large monsters. The inconsistency, it grabs your attention, like you could almost see this scenario being real. And then of course, you're reminded it's a fantasy game and these animals aren't real. Sometimes when people ask me what my favorite dinosaur is, I instinctively just want to say Lagiacrus, but it's not a real animal. I tried to play with the idea of juxtaposition when I made this funny video, which you're looking at right now, a few years back, where it was like a skit. I was supposed to be like Monster Hunter living in the real world, sort of like the commercials for Monster Hunter Try. It was important for me to try to nail the juxtaposition of the monsters, the humans, and the environment, which all visually clash with one another, which creates a very striking image. I don't know if I captured it there, and I certainly don't know if I captured the aesthetic of Monster Hunter 1 in this video, but I hope that my efforts at least shed light on what exactly this game feels like when you play it. If you have your own experiences, please share them into the comments. So has this aesthetic stayed consistent? So, just looking at the mainline games, I argue that Monster Hunter 2 Duels continued the aesthetics for the most part. Yeah, sure, it decided to make the jungle more bright and tropical, and it also had the inclusion of the snowy mountains, which it does make the game visually brighter, but then when you bring in the idea of the changing cycles, it goes from day to night, and suddenly it's super dark, I think it complemented the hunting maps, and it helped keep that consistent tone from Monster Hunter 1. In Monster Hunter 3 Try, they continued with that hazy look, and they also included the extremely dark cave systems that required a torch. The monsters were still intimidating, and the music was still scary at times. Monster Hunter 4 basically had zombie monsters. Gore Magala created this dark tone. Many of the locations had high contrast, where the dark colors were dark and the bright colors were bright. I feel this is still relatively consistent with the original game's aesthetic. However, with the portable series, things are a bit different. I mentioned this at the beginning. They engineered the game engine to function better on the PSP, and it would be easier to make out what was going on the tiny screen. The first few portable games, yeah, they're very consistent. I mean, I'm using Freedom Unite's footage for talking about Monster Hunter 1's aesthetic. However, you can see that it disappeared with Portable Third. Suddenly everything is quite flashy, and the peaceful tone of the village shifts into this cheery tone. I mentioned Monster Hunter 3 Try earlier, but I didn't talk about Monster Hunter 3 G, and it's because it also follows a lot of Portable Third's design philosophy. It's much brighter, and it's much goofier than the original Monster Hunter 3. Port Tanzia is extremely different from Lock Lack City. The UI is way more cutesy, and the maps are less intimidating, and they are not dark like they were in the original game. Monster Hunter Cross and Double Cross are further exaggerations of this cheery attitude that's present in Portable Third and 3G. Now in this game, everyone just celebrates with a song and dance number. The hunting styles and arts bring an explosive attitude to the hunts. Now the hunters are physically on par with the monsters. They're just blowing things up, using lasers. And this is very different from from how they used to be when the hunters were quite insignificant compared to the monsters. I believe this started because they probably wanted to cater Portable Third to a larger market, or maybe the Portable series as a general. There probably were a lot of kids with PSPs and 3DSs, and they probably just wanted to sell to that demographic. I mean, I don't know. In Japan, is the yokai motif more popular with kids, or is it more popular with adults? I always thought it was more popular with kids. I don't know. Tell me in the comments. Then we get content like Monster Hunter Stories, which is clearly more cutesy, and it's definitely there to cater to a different audience, to a new audience. And it makes me think, like, well, how do you market to kids? Well, you create a fun mascot character like Navarro, whatever. This distinction between the old and the new aesthetic reminds me of the distinction between manga and anime.
Wait, what?
It's a little bit ridiculous, but hear me out here. While Monster Hunter is mainly delivered through the medium of video games, anime and manga are different mediums for different markets. There's a reason people will say, read the book, or the book was better when talking about movies. It's because in reality, they are simply different mediums, and they each hold their own value, and thus have their own distinct style that you won't see in the alternative. Alright, I need an example of a manga franchise. I guess it would be too easy to mention Berserk, wouldn't it? Okay, what's something I've actually read? Sakino? Mooncat? Oh, right. You know, I always forget that Monster Hunter did a crossover with that. Yeah, I'll use this. So, Sailor Moon is a good example because the style of the manga and the style of the show is so strikingly different. The manga only needs to focus on the most important element in the panel, which usually just happens to be characters or action. Meanwhile, with full animation and color, the background spaces are elevated and they're given more importance. They're still technically negative space, but they aren't as mundane. They are bright and they have their own value to them. They're not just white space like in a manga panel. We see this in newer Monster Hunter titles, especially in Monster Hunter Double Cross, where the map backgrounds are extremely convoluted, detailed, and colorful. They have to be, otherwise they would not match the intensity of the hunter arts the player is using. So in this way, I describe old Monster Hunter to be like a manga, because it's silent, it's full of these mundane, negative spaces, but that allows the characters and the creatures to stand out. The movement is slow, but when you get a good hit on the monster, it's a very striking and satisfying image. While new Monster Hunter, I can describe it like an anime. It's very fast, it's focused on interesting visual animation, it's flashy, and there's a more vivid sound. Now, every single hit on the monster is exciting. To me, honestly, it's a bit overwhelming. I do want to stress here, I am comparing the aesthetic of these video games to the overall aesthetic of two different types of mediums of art. So yes, this is an extremely ridiculous and unfair comparison. This is like apples to oranges, but this is the only way I can actually make sense of what I'm talking about in my brain. I don't know. Again, the obvious answer is obvious. Yes, Monster Hunter has changed its tone over the years. It's not as dark as it used to be. You know, it also bothers me when people say that Monster Hunter World was apparently missing the charm of the series, and that Monster Hunter Rise brought back the charm. Rather, I would say that Monster Hunter World was trying to be true to the OG, meanwhile Monster Hunter Rise was only trying to be true to Portable Third and Double Cross. And even that's a complex discussion. Okay, well, let's start with Monster Hunter World. Now, I'm not considering Monster Hunter 1's aesthetic to be a gold standard for the franchise or anything, but it is interesting to see how close Monster Hunter World got to it. The hunting maps in Monster Hunter World are just too visually complex, though. They don't provide a sufficient negative space for the monsters and hunters to stand out. If the game had more visually intense hunting combat, then I don't think this would be a problem, but right now they kind of overwhelm the image. The solution would be to add more fog to the game, but currently the built-in fog kind of kills performance on PC, so there's many players who don't even have it on. Also, there isn't really a clear enough distinction between the chaos of nature and the peacefulness of human life. When you're out on a quest, the handler is always there, and she's always cheery and positive, even if you're literally dying. And then when you're back in Astera or Celiana, the stress is quite high. Everyone's barking orders at each other, and it makes sense because they're a militarized unit. I think these elements work to make Monster Hunter World a unique and fun experience on its own. You know, the individual pieces are worth less than the sum of their parts in this situation, but that being said, personally I'd prefer to return to the older style because I'm a boomer. Similar circumstances appear in Rise. While Monster Hunter World has too much stress bleeding into the village, Monster Hunter Rise has too much of that cheery tone bleeding into the hunt. Monster Hunter Rise's music has the consistent theme of including vocals in every single song. These vocals are bringing more humanity into the hunt, as if humanity is cheering for the player. When you couple this with the voice lines delivered by the player hunters, it makes every hunt feel like it's a party. The maps are thankfully quite dull and mundane, which is something I liked over World, but it's just a shame that there's no environmental weather to complement it. There's no fog or rain, and even when Kasheladora appears, there's no effect on the environment. To me, this is lazy because we've seen it in every other title. It also kind of logically ruins the flooded forest. The shrine ruins looked very promising in the promotional images. I thought that they were finally going to bring back the mysterious edge the old maps had with that fog, but this image was a lie. There is no fog. I remember when Chameleos was released, I realized how much better the map looks with fog. I'd love to see this fog every time I hunt in the Shrine Ruins, but oh well. Again, these elements work for Rise, and they create the unique Rise gameplay experience, but I'm just left hoping that the next title will return to that old style because I'm a boomer. You know, it sucks having autism. I wish I could just be normal and play these new Monster Hunter titles without being bothered by, like, a lack of fog. Also, this video was one I've been wanting to do for a few months, but I kind of struggled with writing a clickbait title and hook. To me, this is a weak video, but whatever. I'll try to think of something stronger next time. Or maybe this will be my last video. I don't know. I'm like a traffic light malfunctioning. Have a good day, everybody. Bye.